Our next presenter is Preeti Sathe.
Hello. I hope.
Yes, ma'am. We can hear you.
Yeah. 1 second. I'll just share my screen. Doing the chair.
We can see your screen, ma'am. Kindly open your
Can you see my
PPT.
screen?
Yes, ma'am. We can see your screen. Kindly open your PPT and then start your presentation, ma'am. Yes,
Is
ma'am.
this visible to you all?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's perfect. I can start now.
Sure. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Preeti Sathe. I work with psychology, and currently I've been working with a few of my own clients. And today, what I'm going to present to you is a finding that I have been developing over the last couple of years. We all are aware that continuity of healthcare is a known need for even chronic medical illnesses, and healthcare over the centuries has found a workaround for chronic disease care to maintain the continuity in chronic disease care. However, the more we work with users of mental health care, it's obvious that the difficulty in devising similar continuity milestones is much more of a problem in mental health care. I have attempted to understand this difficulty from the perspective of the care users and their experiences as they undergo this care, and that is what I'm going to be presenting today. Just to set the background, mental health care is more like a journey and not like a single moment. The key characteristic of mental health care is this, that it is not just a string of events or string of episodes that you end up with in the clinic with, but it's more like balancing a path where one walks in an attempt to actually balance yourself while interacting with everything that you encounter on the way and on the side. However, mental health care consultations, on the other hand, are pretty episodic. It's like a snapshot, as if a user encounters a difficulty and brings into the clinic a screenshot of what happened in his movie of life. In between such consultations, too, the user's life is progressing with varying degrees of compliance to the advice that the clinician has already given to him in the last visit. Now, the difficulty is that at the next visit, a clinician is actually assessing and reconstructing the probable scenarios that may have led the user to reach for this second visit. What's even more complicating in this is that many users often go back to life as was immediately after their visit, and they return to life as was. So the benefit of the clinical consultation is not always carried in their day-to-day life. Especially in mental health care, continuity matters even more than in medical health care, for the simple reason that it's not very easy to counsel the patients or to tell the patients, take, say, 3 or 4 tablets 3 times a day, and then that's a very quick action that they can follow even in between two visits. That doesn't happen with mental health care. In mental health care, the advice that is given actually trickles down in every moment of the patient's life in between the consultations also. And not just that the advice has to be implemented in every moment, but the experiences that the user gets in interacting with his life also shape the context of mental health care. So it becomes a two-way bidirectional influence on his mental health rather than just some medicine which is giving a unidirectional effect on the health. And the problem compounds because the journey between these two visits often remains invisible to the clinician. So, the aim of my study today was to explore the existence and the nature of a longitudinal gap that may develop as experienced by the users in episodic mental health care. The methods that I had used were an exploratory survey, which actually initiated or instigated this entire pilot study. The exploratory survey was through lay people online questionnaires that I had administered, around 30 responses, and we developed a interview method to get into deeper into the problem. I've conducted in-depth interviews with individuals from varied life experiences using mental health care or the caregivers of these users, and then conducted a thematic analysis and interpretation from what was expressed by the users of care or the caregivers to the users of care. These interviews were a 1 hour in-depth interview followed by an analysis by at the back end, and then getting back to the respondents to verify in case I had any questions about what they had expressed in the hour-long interview. This is the variety of the respondents that I have interviewed. Two young adults with lived experience using mental health care, a middle-aged adult with lived experience, one primary giver of a child where the child is not in a position to do any kind of self-care on or following of the advice, and the primary caregiver has to do that for the child, and a primary caregiver of an adult family member who is currently receiving ongoing mental health care. Now, this is the actual observations and the thematic inferences that were followed. This probably needs a little more explanation, and I'll go to a little depth in getting this through to you. Theme 1 showed up related to coordinating for appointments and navigating care. Now, this is not something which is very new to mental health care alone, which essentially has been identified in other studies too. However, what did emerge in our interviews was that the patient's life evolving as well as their own abilities clouded the difficulty that they were experiencing. Like, for example, it's very easy for a person with a very logical train of thought and very clear mind to do internet searches, to do clinician searches, to identify which clinician to get to, how to coordinate appointments. Whereas for a mental health care user, this in itself increases the difficulty for him and makes the care coordination journey even more difficult for them. Not just that, for these people, acquiring help or support from family members is also more difficult than for a medical healthcare user, for the simple reason that society, even today, has a very judgmental attitude towards mental health care. So, continuity requires coordinated guidance, and that guidance is not very easily available for these people. The second theme that emerged from the interviews was that preservation of a clinically meaningful context in the interviews and in the subsequent visits. Now, this to a certain extent is addressed by relational continuity. Relational continuity has been identified in other mental health care studies also, just like navigation continuity. However, what our interviews did bring up was relational continuity does not suffice to maintain the clinically meaningful context. Respondents made mention of how the current stage of their lives modified their understanding of how they felt they needed help. In the ability to open up to the clinician may also be influenced as their life moves on, and the clinician isn't always a witness to how their life is moving on. So, preserving the context is not as easy in mental health care and just does not get satisfied by relational continuity, which has been identified in other studies. The third theme that emerged from my interviews was that the participants often struggle to recognize and articulate or to communicate changing emotional and psychological needs. This theme surprisingly came up where a good relationship is already set with a clinician over a period of time. And yet, depending upon the patient's stage and state in his mental health, it was the ease to relate to the personality of the clinician and the expectations of the user from the clinician changed. What seemed easier to articulate to one clinician was 2 to 3 years down the line, with a more maturity or changed understanding of his own mental health, was not as easy now. And the clinician was left to actually continuously align with the changing needs of one single patient, and he has, say, at least 10 patients at any given point in time. So that makes the recognition of the articulation of the need much more difficult in mental health care, and time or longitudinal continuity complicates this even further. The fourth and a very surprising and not very easily identified theme that came up in our interviews was long-term therapeutic relationships did promote openness and collaborative work for patients. However, what actually came up is over a period of time, there is a shared understanding that even the user develops of what exactly is happening to him. There were respondents' comments which actually told us that these respondents are not even able to articulate or understand what is wrong with them, or what actually or where actually is the slip in their thinking patterns or in their understanding of their situation. So they are not in a position to articulate it in a manner that they think the clinician is able to understand. So they struggle with that understanding, and very often this understanding develops as a shared understanding between the clinician and the patient over a period of time. So the longitudinal shared understanding development is an extremely important need in mental health care, and becomes much more difficult because the patient's life is also moving. He is also growing up. His experiences of life are changing, whereas the clinician is not a witness to all of that. The fifth theme, though I've presented it as a fifth theme here, is not exactly a separate theme, but more an integration of the first four themes, which basically saying that there is no witness to the patient's life while the patient is living and implementing the clinician's advice. This makes it more difficult for the patient to come back to the clinic and try and give the clinician an entire history or an entire story. Even the narrating the story becomes difficult for the patient, first of all, because he's currently struggling to understand his own emotions or his own difficulties of cognizance. At the same time, his priority or his importance of what is happening in his life currently or today obviously takes precedence over what has actually been happening in between the two sessions, and whether he has been using the in between time for doing his homework properly or not. So information transfer becomes more related to the patient's current moment or snapshot that he's bringing to the clinic at the moment, and does not actually relate entirely. So this longitudinal support in between clinical encounters has become a major problem, and the interviews that I had conducted have brought out what I initially started out to explore, that this really has become identifiable and important to in-depth understand kind of an issue in mental health care. To summarize the discussions that we've just now had in the themes, the continuity was experienced as an ongoing journey and not as isolated consultations. It was not like a string of beads, but more a continuous, non-discrete kind of an experience that needed to be understood. Shared understanding appeared to develop progressively through repeated interactions. Experiences between consultations were perceived as central to future clinical care, and participants themselves described the continuity need as preserving the evolving therapeutic journey rather than merely maintaining historical records. Unlike in general healthcare, you can just maintain a file of your historical clinic visits or historical tests and carry that file to a next clinician. That does not really carry the information properly to the in mental health care. One of the what you say very important or very classical comments made by one of my respondents was, my current clinician is the best, and yet my best friend knows far more about my life than my very good clinician does. Maybe I should take my friend to my clinic visits next time. Now, this actually tells you how much witness is required for the patient for his life, a person witness, and a clinician may not necessarily be able to do that for all his patients, of course. This actually gives us implications that mental health is lived continuously, but clinical care is often delivered and has to be delivered episodically. That the period between the consultations may contain clinically relevant information, which is important to tap. And future research should investigate methods how we can preserve longitudinal understanding for the mental health care user to deliver better healthcare for them. Larger studies will be needed to validate these preliminary findings. Future directions, I would love future research to explore methods of preserving and synthesizing longitudinal lived experiences in such a way that are practical for routine clinical care. These were the references that I started off the study with, and one or two places where I mentioned that some studies have identified informational relational continuity, but not exactly in the manner that came up in these 5 interviews that we conducted with exploratory respondents. So because mental health care is a journey, I really feel future research is required in this to articulate much better how longitudinal continuity of care can be addressed in mental health care. Thank you. And I'm open to any questions on how the study was conducted.
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Preeti Saltage. And the participant, if you have any question, kindly use the raise hand feature in Zoom. And Dr. Pragati has a question for you.
Yes.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Preeti. I am Dr. Pragati. I hope I am audible to you.
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Okay, ma'am, could you just throw some light that in your studies, where do you see the role of digital healings, like digital apps and digital healing process, which is very in these days, like larger generation of today, they
Yeah.
are more comfortable with the digital mode of healing, rather they actually come in contact with the real psychologists,
Yes.
the real people or the mind healers, as we can state them. So, what take do you have on them? It's like whether it should be recommended to them, like they can be on these kind of a digital healing for the mental care, or do you think that it can be in the long run? It is this kind of prognosis is not right. I mean, I really want to know on this because I myself in this journey of mind healing, and I feel that they are more comfortable there than coming to me.
Absolutely. Yes.
So
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, I mean, can I answer or are you articulating the question yet? Hello, can you hear me? Hello.
ma'am, please answer. Please answer. My question was that only.
Yeah. I mean, I'm so happy for this question that you've raised. Yes, actually, use of technology and all these apps and things like that, especially using AI, using yes, it does increase the comfort level for the person to actually communicate and to make it a witness to its life. Yes, and this longitudinal continuity that has come up in these interviews that I have just now conducted, yes, absolutely, it would be a big help. However, there are some concerns with this. Current apps I found are they kind of prescribe uh, treatments, or they end up allowing the patient to treat self. Now, one of the biggest problems that personally I feel in the mental health care space is a person who's currently struggling with how to actually conduct himself is now allowed to treat himself with another app, despite the fact that the app may be created beautifully. Still, I mean, the decision of how to treat the person cannot be left to the app. So from that point of view, if we can identify a way to actually keep the AI or the app restricted to becoming a witness for the person, like what I said earlier, this patient who came back with a comment saying that I wish I could carry my trained like an information portal kinds to my clinician every time. Yeah, that kind of a support system through an app, I think would be phenomenal, would be extremely useful. However, allowing the patient to decide, diagnose, and set up its own treatment pattern may not necessarily be the best, because the patient currently is struggling with his own thought processes. I mean, you can't leave it to the patient to decide what kind of treatment he should get. Could get into a little bit of an issue. So currently, I think my interaction with clinicians has been that, other clinicians, I mean, has been that there is a big divide, and many of the clinicians do not recommend the use of such apps because of this particular reason that I just mentioned. Does that answer your question? Am I audible? Was my answer audible?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much. Actually,
Thank
I was unmuted by the host, so I could not answer.
you.
Yes,
Okay.
perfectly. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, even I feel the same that if we are living in the digital world, we can all together cannot say that digital doesn't work. Okay,
Yeah,
digital doesn't work. Digital does work.
it
And
does.
yes, as you said that we need a proper prescription and guided. I think so. It is more of the guided learning which we need to give
Absolutely.
today's generation,
Yes,
which
yes.
I have understood that cannot be ignored. We cannot
Yeah,
ignore them. We have to accept them.
you have to.
So and inculcate them in our clinical practices. This is what I get. So thank you so much, Dr. Preeti. Thank you for the great insight. Thank you.
Thank you. Ma'am, can I get your name, please?
I'm Dr. Pragati Sahai.
Okay. Thank you very much, doctor.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
ma'am.
Yes, thank you for your presentation, Ms. Preeti, and thank you for the question and answering session. We are moving to our next presenter.